Welcome to the workshop for the bias-free decision-making in the probation department. My name is Selma Safadine. I'm the criminal justice section attorney for the American Bar Association. Today, we're here because our racial justice improvement project, which is a project from the criminal justice section that's funded from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, came together with the Delaware Task Force and decided that probation revocation would be their focus. Now, the Racial Justice Improvement Project set out to choose 4 jurisdictions across the nation, the state of Delaware being one, St. Louis County, Minnesota being the other, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Brooklyn, New York. Those 4 jurisdictions each were to form a task force to identify racial disparity in their jurisdiction, accumulate data to further explain that disparity, and then come together as a community to implement reform to decrease or eliminate that disparity. Each of the 4 jurisdictions chose a different focus, and Delaware, like I said, their focus is probation revocation. Now, Delaware is particularly interesting for us because Delaware has also done their own initiatives in regards to racial justice and bias-free decision-making. And Justice Ridgely, who's here today, will speak to you in that regard. But basically, the task force for Delaware came together and said, we'd like, as our first stop on this mission of bias-free decision-making in the criminal justice system, is to train our probation department supervisors on what it means to make bias-free decision-making and how to identify when our decisions are coupled with bias. Wayne McKenzie, who is our faculty presenter here today, is the general counsel for the New York City Probation Department. He also is the former director of the Racial Justice Initiative for VERA in New York City, and he is our advisory board committee member for the Racial Justice Improvement Project, and also serves as the co-chair of our Race and Justice Diversity Committee of the American Bar Association. Edwin Burnett, who's also going to help facilitate this conference today, is also a chair of that same committee, the Race and Diversity Committee for the American Bar Association, and he also serves as an advisory board for our Racial Justice Improvement Project. Ed Burnett was a public defender in Delaware in Cooks County, Delaware, for 19 years before he served this country. Chicago. Oh, what did I say? Delaware? Sorry, excuse me. Chicago for 19 years, Cooks County, and he served our country for 22 years as well. Ed Burnett also does a lot of different initiatives, and both Ed and Wayne have both been very, very, very prevalent in ensuring cultural competency across the nation through conducting training such as this one. We also have here today Robert Koop, who serves on the Delaware Task Force here in Delaware, and he is going to speak to you a little bit today. He's served on the Delaware Police Department for about 26 years, 22, 26? And he's here today to speak to you all in regards to the law enforcement cooperation with this project and on the task force. We also have Justice Ridgely here today, who serves on the Delaware Supreme Court, and he is a justice that is extremely, extremely involved in these racial justice issues, most particularly with bias-free decision-making, and he'll talk to you today about those endeavors. And we have Kurt Shockley as well, who's here today, and he really doesn't need too much of an introduction. He is the head of probation and a large part of why you're here today. So I'm going to hand it over to Kurt, and Kurt will say a few words, and then we can get started.
Thank you, Selma, and welcome everyone to today's training workshop. And I'd just like to say another thank you to the ABA for all the work that they put into bringing this to us in Delaware today, and also thank you to the Racial Justice Improvement Project for everything that they've done. And I just wanted to say a few words about how I became involved in the task force and talk about some of the things that we've been working on. Back in October, I was asked by Commissioner Danberg to attend the Racial Justice Improvement Project task force meeting at the Supreme Court. And it was at this meeting that I learned that they were interested in looking at probation revocations. And specifically, they were wanting to look at all the violation reports and have them broken down by race and by level. So, with the help of Chris Seco, actually a lot of help from Chris Seco, we pulled together 3 months worth of data regarding violation reports. And we crunched the numbers, we took them back, and the numbers were encouraging. And we took them back to the next task force meeting. And I think the task force was equally as pleased with what the outcome was. But they said, let's take a little deeper look. Let's look a little bit more in depth. So we went back, Chris and I went back, and we pulled another 6 months worth of data. So now you're talking about 9 months worth of violation reports. And Chris, if I'm not mistaken, it was about 5,000 reports that we actually looked at. And we broke them down by race and by level. And what the outcome, what we found, was that there was a 4% increase in the number of violation reports that were written on black offenders in comparison to the percentage of black offenders that were actually on probation. So a 4% increase is what we were talking about. And statistically, I think that's pretty minimal, but it also tells us that we have room for improvement. There's a 4%. And if the goal was to be at 0%, then we've got things that we maybe can do to help us reach that goal. And that's kind of why we're here today. And so the task force, we identified some areas, some ideas that we thought we could talk about, and things that we could do. One of the things that we identified that we've already accomplished is in our professional conduct policy, which I know you guys just recently got a copy of, we included bias-free decision-making language in that policy. So that's already been done. The second thing we worked on was bringing this training to you today. And again, we wouldn't have been able to pull it off in such a quick time if it wasn't for Salma and your efforts to bring this to us. So, but we're here today for that. Another thing that we're working on in the future is to actually incorporate in our BOTC academies a module concerning bias-free decision-making. So that way all new officers that come on board get a piece of the bias-free decision-making and what skills that it takes to accomplish that. And in the future, some of the long-range goals that we're looking at, we're talking with Delgis, and they're going to work with a system that will enable us to look at these numbers more quickly and gather the information that we're looking for. We're also looking to talk with our tax folks about a way of maybe in the violation report having a tab that actually identifies the graduated sanctions that probation officers actually utilize prior to submitting a violation report. And I think that's really good information. It's good from a management standpoint. It'll also be good from a course perspective. So those are things that we've worked on and that we're going to continue to work on. But like I said, thank you to the ABA for bringing this training today. I think everyone, I think it's going to be some really good information. I encourage you just to sit back and enjoy the training, participate. The training, it's geared directly for probation patrol in Delaware. It's not aimed at any one person or any race. But it's really just to raise our awareness, to educate us more in the area of bias-free decision-making. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justice Ridgely, who is the chair of Delaware's Racial Justice Improvement Project Task Force.
It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here to this program, which is sponsored by the Racial Justice Task Force in Delaware, with assistance, financial and technical assistance from the American Bar Association Criminal Justice Section. We do have with us Professor Cynthia Jones, who is the project director for the ABA initiative, which, as you heard earlier from Salma, is focusing in only 4 jurisdictions, and we're the only state involved. I also want to thank you, Director Shockley, for all of your hard work on this project, and thank each one of you for all the hard work that you do in probation and parole. I was a Superior Court judge for almost 20 years, the last 14 as the president judge. And here in Kent County, if it was 9 a.m., I was meeting with one of you. We had Operation Safe Streets, which had the cages returns every morning. So that's how I knew where I was in the right place and on time and on schedule, because you were there. And I'm well aware of the challenges that each of you face in the work that you do and the importance of the work that you do to assist the courts. Because you, more than anyone else, are out there monitoring compliance with court orders, enforcing court orders, and rehabilitating offenders. The dangers of the work, of course, I'm aware of that as well. I was talking to Kurt earlier this morning about the Derek Smallwood case. That was one of the last cases that I tried in Kent County. It was an attempted murder charge where Officer Doug Watts and Patrolman David Spicer, the Dover Police, were engaged in a shootout with Derek Smallwood, and fortunately all survived. But it is dangerous work. The bias-free decision-making concept, when we were talking about this at the task force level, we were focused on initially our Declaration of Leading Practices, which the Delaware Criminal Justice Council unanimously endorsed in April of last year. That's in the packet of information you have. And it's just one more example of the leadership role that Delaware can take and has taken in addressing this very important topic. The Declaration essentially was adapted from best practices utilized by law enforcement to apply across the board to the criminal justice system, to all the courts, to law enforcement, to municipalities, to other police agencies, to anyone actually involved in the criminal justice community. And what's particularly unique about this declaration, I believe, is that it's adopted by the Criminal Justice Council, and it has a provision in there that anyone who seeks funding from the Criminal Justice Council has some incentive. If a court, an agency, or a police department certifies compliance with these leading practices, it will receive a preference in funding over any applicant that does not. So there is now a financial incentive for all involved in the criminal justice community to focus on these best practices, and one of them is bias-free decision-making. When I talked to Commissioner Danberg about the opportunity for the Department of Correction to be involved in this effort, he welcomed the opportunity. It wasn't our intent to ambush Kurt when he came to the meeting, but it was one where the background that we were looking at is discretion points. Much as when a police officer has a discretion point on whether to pull someone over, on make a traffic stop, what are the factors that apply in there, and how can we ensure that there is a bias-free decision being made? Well, why is this important? There is an article that struck me by a prosecutor, Robert M. A. Johnson, who chaired the criminal justice section for a period of time, titled Racial Bias in the Criminal Justice System and Why We Should Care. He refers to a 1995 Gallup poll. 50% of Black Americans said the criminal justice system is biased against them. And they said that in that poll. More than 2/3 of Black Americans in the poll said police racism against blacks is common across the country. And more than 52% of whites agreed. Police, prosecutors, correction officials across the country often deny the existence of bias and see no need for change, but there's two flaws in that conclusion. First, bias may not be as apparent to them as to persons of color. And second, whether bias is real or not, we must change the perception that it exists. Why? The answer is quite simple. Lack of trust undermines the criminal justice system, the courts, the work all of us do, and the rule of law. Witnesses may not testify, citizens may not cooperate, juries may not convict, and there can be controversial acquittals. And as the American Bar Association's Kennedy Commission recognized, even a perception of unfairness may itself, quote, lead to crime, disrespect for the law, and even a willingness to nullify or subvert the law. What to do? Well, let's face the issue. The Delaware Supreme Court and the Criminal Justice Council in 2007 hosted a two-day summit on racial and ethnic fairness. We focused on a path forward and strategies to improve racial and ethnic fairness and perception of it in our criminal and juvenile justice system. More than 70 criminal justice and community leaders attended in Delaware. We had presentations and breakout discussions. Chief Justice Steele was there. Lieutenant Governor Carney was there. Brooklyn District Attorney Joe Hines spoke on achieving racial and ethnic fairness, a moral imperative for the criminal justice system. Mark Maurer of the Sentencing Project gave an overview of rates of incarceration across the country. Delaware is actually right in the middle at number 25. The Department of Safety and Homeland Security Secretary David Mitchell at the time spoke on racial profiling in law enforcement, pitfalls and prevention strategies. And Dr. Pamela Casey and Madeline Herman of the National Center for State Courts gave us an overview of state court approaches to assessing and promoting racial and ethnic fairness. Former president of the National Black Prosecutors Association and one of our speakers today, Wayne McKenzie, addressed us, as well as others. The summit included hours of discussion, and it involved assessment of the problem, identified factors that affect fairness, responsibilities of the criminal justice community, collaborations that can be undertaken, and key decision points. Positive steps have been taken since then. All Delaware judicial officers have received a request from the Chief Justice for their commitment to bias-free decision-making. Every Delaware judge was provided a booklet entitled Achieving Fairness Through Bias-Free Behavior, a pocket guide to the courts, published by the National Center for State Courts. And not only have all judges received this, it's now part of every employee's training within the judicial branch. It addresses a number of factors, recognizing bias, how bias is manifested in the courtroom, the judge's role in eliminating bias, how to ensure bias-free behavior, demonstrating respect, neutrality, and fairness, and institutionalizing fairness, which is key. The Delaware Criminal Justice Council's declaration, again, led to our application for the APA grant, which is funding this event and the work of our task force. And I'm asking you today for your commitment, just as we have asked others for theirs. Why is that important? Well, first, every day you are part of the work of the courts in Delaware. And we must have the perception, not only the actual fairness and impartiality, but the perception of it. But most importantly, fairness and the perception of it are essential to public trust and the confidence in the courts and the work that all of us do together. I want to thank you again for your commitment and your leadership. Delaware is truly out front in this area, and you're now part of that. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Rob Coop with the Delaware State Police. Like many of you, went to a panel with a lot of attorneys. One of our own justices get a little nervous. Justice Ridgely put me at ease because the foundation that he laid in his remarks is also the same the same point that I want to drive home. Recently in our training academy, we just added a new block of training for our recruits, and it's under our umbrella of bias-free policing. And that training is based on the movie Crash, which is a Hollywood movie. Sandra Bullock, Chris Ludacris Bridges is in it, Matt Dillon, a lot of other Hollywood stars. And I had a chance to review the curriculum over the weekend. I took home a copy of the movie, made my family sit down and watch it with me. And any of you who have seen the movie, just to put your mind at ease, my children are older, they're 18 and 23, it just happened, if you know. So I told them that there was a teaching lesson, a learning lesson in the movie, gave an idea what I was looking for out of the curriculum, and we watched it together, and it was a good experience as far as the topic we're talking about today goes. So if you get a chance to see it, it is definitely worthwhile. But there's one particular scene early in the movie that I wanted to share with you here today, because I think it is representative of what the goal is here today. And in that scene, it's early on, there's two of the characters coming out of a restaurant. And the one character, his name is Anthony, played by Chris Ludacris Bridges. And the other character is Pete, who is his friend Peter. They come out of the restaurant, they're both black males, and quickly from their dialogue, we learn that this is a predominantly white area of LA. And Anthony asked Peter about the service they just received in this restaurant. And basically he feels that he's been treated differently, that he's been a victim of discrimination. And he acknowledges that even though their waitress was a black female, that she definitely was catering to the white customers more. And he asked, did any of the white customers wait an hour and 32 minutes for a plate of spaghetti? And his friend's like, no, what's your point? And he said, do you know why she didn't wait on us, why she didn't keep after us? He said, because most people believe that black people don't tip. So Peter naturally asked Anthony, well, what did you leave her? He says, nothing, I'm not going to pay for that kind of service. So Peter starts laughing because Anthony just personified the same stereotype that he's complaining about. And I think and then as that scene unfolds, there's more stereotypes to play out. I won't tell you about those because once you go into the movie with that kind of mindset, it's almost ridiculous when you see some of these stereotypes played out on the big screen and you realize that you've heard them. Maybe you believed in some, and you realize how ridiculous it is to do that. But it's also something I think we can consider as law enforcement officers and we can consider today in your training today. And that is, as law enforcement officers, alluding back to the judge's remarks, we try to do everything right. We try to follow the rules. We try to treat everyone fairly. We're impartial with our application of the law, and so on and so on. But even after all that, there's still people out there that have the perception that police officers, law enforcement officers, are prejudiced, are racist, that the system is stacked against minorities and against the poor. So even though we feel that we're doing everything right, and as Kurt said, sometimes the statistics even support that we're doing everything right. Why do some people still have that perception? Is it because of the stereotypes that they have about us? Or are we sometimes, like the characters in the movie, unintentionally playing into those stereotypes, which then supports that perception that they have of us? Together, as leaders, you, all of us in law enforcement, we can make a difference and change the perception that people have of law enforcement. We can help our peers and those that we supervise to recognize when they are playing into one of those stereotypes, or maybe even letting their personal bias affect the decision that they're making. One of the initial steps for the members of this task force was to review policies and training in the Delaware State Police. As the judge talked about the topic of racial profiling. More than a decade ago, law enforcement went under the microscope because that topic came to the forefront. And because of that, our agency, like many other agencies, put policies and training in place to try to make sure that our officers are aware of that and strive for bias-free policing. And what we've done as a group is we've looked at those policies, looked at the training, and talked about what could be brought to our brothers and sisters in probation and parole. And that's what brings you here today, is that we recognize there's benefits in us sharing our policies, our training with with other agencies. Because in looking at our own, we're going to make ours better as well, which has also happened because of these discussions. There's changes that we've made, and hopefully, based on the feedback that we get from your experience today, maybe this is training that we bring to a broader law enforcement group within our state. So some examples of that would be much like Kurt talked about how you can track your VOP violators. Obviously, we can track all the traffic stops that we make, and we do that. And every year, that data is brought together. An analyst looks it over and presents that to the executive staff to ensure that our enforcement efforts are reflective of the diverse community that we serve. And we're always looking to see is there any areas that we need to improve in or any areas that we need to be concerned with. We also regularly review our training programs and our policies related to bias-free policing and bias-free decision-making with a goal, as the judge said, to earn the community's trust, because that's when we're most effective, and we all know that. And also with the hope that the community will have a positive perception, not only of our agency, but of all law enforcement community. So with that, I hope that you find today's training beneficial, and together we can continue to work hard to earn the community's trust and also their support. So thank you. Good night.